Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I am joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Mackenzie.
Hello.
And Alex.
Present.
All right. Present, not president.
Your mustache isn't present.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's gone. It's kind of let's have a moment of silence for our fallen mustache.
For those who didn't watch last week, you really missed out.
Yeah, they did. No, we're back with another episode this week. It's the month of November, and we thought we would take this opportunity to cover a fairly difficult conversation to have, which is around sex addiction and pornography. One trend that you see on Twitter in the month of November, or other social media platforms for that matter, is hashtag No Nut November. I hope to save you from a Google search. Don't go searching for what that means if you're confused. Wow. But technically, it's a celibacy exercise. It's something that every month, every year, when November comes around, you start to see this practice. It's almost kind of become a joke, maybe. But we figured it would be a good time to kind of maybe bring awareness to problems that might be happening right under your nose. Maybe you're listening to this right now and you're struggling with it. And also we have, Rachel, Mackenzie, you're here to, kind of give, I think a lot of times the male, standpoint or perspective is what's always shared.
Yeah, it gets a lot of airtime.
Yeah. And so we wanted you guys to be here to kind of share your thoughts on this as well. But Alex, you had an opportunity earlier to sit down with Robert Murphy and kind of have a conversation about his story.
Yeah, so Robert is a friend of mine. He was on staff here at Christ Community for over 12 years in a variety of roles, and a guy that loves ministry, still doing a lot of great ministry out there. And so because of our friendship, I knew this was something that's been a part of his life. And so he was so gracious to come on, chat with me a little bit, and be vulnerable about his story, his addiction to pornography, and how that started. He talked about just the process of confessing that to people and the layers that happen there. And so I think it'll be a story that hopefully people are able to relate to in one way or another. It's not everybody's story, but it was a real vulnerable story, and I appreciate him coming on and chatting with us, and hopefully it's something that is beneficial to everyone as they listen to this. Robert, here we are. A little bit of a different setting. Microphones, headsets on, not Chick-fil-A or Raising Cane's.
No.
I feel like every time we get together, it's over chicken. And so we're getting together over a quarter cup of my coffee and nothing for you. So this should be good. First of all, thanks for being here. Thanks for just your friendship over the years. Thanks for your vulnerability and the way that you've cared. Obviously, today we're talking about your story a little bit, and just a topic like we introed a little bit earlier that is heavy, and it can go a lot of different places. There's a lot of shame around this this conversation. I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of denial around this conversation, and then there's even parents probably listening that are trying to be proactive parents for this. And so, anytime we talk around sexuality, which I think is one of those things that is one of the easiest things to promote and talk about in our society, but maybe in the church, one of those taboo things to talk about. So I just want people to know a little bit about you. Tell us who you are before we jump into your specific story around the topic. What's your family life like? Well, where are you from? Where you come from? Any of those kind of things help us get to know Robert Murphy a little bit.
Yeah, no. I'm Robert, and I was on staff here at Christ Community for roughly 12 years, and love Christ Community. Before that, I was a missionary, and I did a lot of work in places like China. And so that's when I was a missionary. That's where I met my wife, Jana. And when I was on staff here, we had 4 boys, and they're ages 13 through 6 and provide a lot of joy and love, and at times want us to pull our hair out, but they're amazing. And, we love, I think for my wife and I, we've grown up in a little bit of the evangelical subculture.
Yeah.
And so for me, one big thing is growing up in that and being told a certain way to live your life, and different things that you were told about. This is what faith is all about. And then as you grow up and get older and realize, wow, that's really not right on a number of subjects. And when you look at the Bible and realize what Jesus is teaching and how he's living by example, and thinking, man, we need to be doing more of this. So that's a passion for Jana and myself, and especially with this topic, realizing we need to be doing a better job of just living out what Jesus wants when it comes to sexuality, and really going deeper beyond that. Just we need to be willing to be vulnerable and open, and letting God's light kind of get into the darkness of our lives and exposing that so it can be redeemed.
Yeah, that's good. And I think I was talking to my small group last night that vulnerability it's such a buzzword. I think in 2019, everyone's like, we need to be more vulnerable and we need to talk, but there's a cost involved in vulnerability, especially, it's easy to be vulnerable maybe to two people, or vulnerable to a group that you never think it's going to get out, but to be vulnerable, like with a microphone and things like that is a totally different story worth applauding. That I don't know everybody that listens all the time to podcasts or hears people's stories understand like the amount of vulnerability it takes. So thanks for your willingness to be on here. So you're a guy that's had over a decade of ministry under your belt, even just at Christ Community Church is where, and that's how you and I met when I was an intern way back in the day. And I remember coming on staff, as an intern, and that was kind of around, I think, when you've begun to have some healing. So I remember hearing from the staff, and we talked about, the topics of pornography and the topics of people being inside a ministry, and that we have to be on guard for these kind of things. And I remember as I was coming on staff, you were kind of a guy that was wrestling through it, and you were kind of one of those people. I remember even in staff meetings, people saying, hey, there is actual opportunity if you're on staff here to talk about this, there's resources of people that have been through things like this. And if you're honest about this, if you're vulnerable about this struggle, you're not going to get just swept out. You're not just going to get kicked out the door. If we find out about it some other random way that you had this struggle and all you've been trying to do is hide it, then maybe you're going to have some of that. So I remember learning that about you, and reading some of your blogs talking about your story. But do you want to just talk about your story as far as sexuality and pornography and addictions, and maybe how that happened? You said you grew up in a Christian subculture and probably went to Purity Princess retreats and things like that, and had the ring and the necklace and signed a covenant and all those kind of things when you were 8 years old. So then what happened? Like, kind of what drew you into pornography, to exploring some of that stuff? Were there stages that happened? And then walk us there, and then we'll figure out like when you realized it was a problem, what it started to do to you, and then where you found redemption through it.
I'm gonna probably start like kind of the pivot point of everything. So it was 2007, I believe. And I went out to a workshop called the Story Workshop, put on by Dan Allender. It's now called the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. And Dan Allender, he came in 2005 here to Christ Community, and he spoke on a number of topics about community, church. And I remember thinking, that's something I want. Just even this command of language and how he spoke with precision on the faith was challenging. Jan and I had our first kid in 2006, Liam. And I remember just at one point, just really in my struggles, I was supposed to be watching Liam, and we're in the living room, and I kind of barricaded him in so he couldn't get out because I needed to get like a fix right then and there. And I just realized I don't know what to do because I'm leaving my son who's crying because he wants his dad. And, he was fine, but he's just crying for me. And I need to get this like fixed because I don't know what to do. And so I went out to this story workshop, and Dan Allender's, 4 days, I believe, is out in Seattle. And I had no idea what I was in for. And to that point, I had always struggled, I think, like everyone. And real quick aside, it's not just a guy issue. It's everyone. It's across the board. And I think sometimes people think pornography is just for men, but there's a study shows, a lot of women, it's an issue that they struggle with as well. And some may not even say struggle. It's something they use. For me, it was not necessarily about sex. It was about a way to cope with pain and trauma from my childhood. But I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that. To me, it was just something that would help kind of take the edge off. It's also a way to you can have like this fantasy where you have a relationship where even if it's in your mind, you're in control and everything's good. And so when I went out to Seattle for the story workshop, it was easy. It's easy to fool people in the church. And it's even like when you have accountability groups or you talk to people, it's easy to kind of throw out different phrases where you can look spiritual and look like you have it together. Yeah. And like one thing I used to joke about is when people ask for prayer requests, there's certain things you can say to like sound spiritual. Like, yeah, I need some more wisdom. I'm like, oh yeah, man, that person's going places because they're asking prayer for wisdom.
They're
like,
the next Solomon.
Yeah, like, oh, I'm struggling. Sometimes I struggle with pride, and they say it in a way where you scrunch up your face and it looks like, oh wow, they're spiritual.
Yeah.
We don't really go anywhere farther. And but I've learned, like, when you say like, I'm struggling with like lust, or I'm struggling with this, people back then didn't know what to do with it. So you learned, and some people would like kind of freak out. So you didn't know who to go to, you didn't know who to talk to. And as a church, we didn't really have any good teachings on it. It was kind of, Caitlin Beatty called it, we had this sexual prosperity gospel. And if you follow these certain things, everything's going to work out for you once you get married. And that was not the case.
Yeah.
And so I will go out, I'm at this workshop, and I couldn't fool anyone because you have licensed practitioners, people with PhDs in psychology and psychiatry, and they can just see through all my lies. And they're very gracious. And before we went out there, we had to write I believe it was like a 1,500 word like story of our life. And I wrote something out talking about my family, and the person who reviewed mine basically said, what are you hiding from yourself? You're lying to me whether you realize it or not. And I remember when I got the feedback, I was kind of took a step back, and I realized, okay, if not now, then when? So I just had to start looking at my life and my story, and trusting that God had me out there for a reason. It maybe not been what I intended, but like this, it was now or never, which is something that I realized. And I could go a couple of different places, but I mean, it was there. I realized if I didn't take this step now to address this issue of my life, I wasn't sure I was ever going to do it. I didn't feel safe back here in Omaha. I didn't feel, even though I worked here at the church, worked with a number of different people who I knew were great people, I think that was the enemy. And it was just the secrets. And once you have that shame and just something you keep hidden, it's easy to kind of have like this kind of conspiracy mindset, like, oh, you can't trust them. And even though these are people you can trust, and they've proven that. You've been burned in the past, and that had happened when I was a young Christian, just confessing to someone that I had struggled with lust, and getting laughed at, and like, oh, you're not a real man, or I can't remember exactly the wording, but I just kind of laughed it off and just realized, there's certain things you just don't confess about when if you're something you're struggling with, because people look at you differently. Yeah. And I didn't want to be looked at differently. I wanted to serve God, and I wanted to be involved in ministry. And I saw how confessing those issues made you look differently, and people weren't gonna they didn't want to use you. You would get kicked out of the ministry, and even for something little. Back then, it was a lot more puritanical. And you still see that in some organizations. It's not to say we shouldn't, we should strive for purity, but it was not. Grace was lacking, and so I was in Seattle. I confessed we were in these small groups, these workshop groups, and confessed in my group, like just kind of where I was at, the struggle, I broke down crying, sobbing for a couple of minutes. And the person that was leading our group just said, "Hey, a lot of times we kind of fly at 30,000 feet and telling our story." And she said, "You landed the plane." And I didn't know what to think, Yep. And I thought, all right, I was kind of like, I was proud, like, oh, I did it. I confessed, and they all came around, loved me, hugged me, prayed for me. And I was like, all right, I did it. Woo, there we go. All right, now what's next? And she kind of told me, all right, now the journey begins. And I was like, what do you mean? Like I
thought I just crossed the finish line.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And quickly realized I had a long road ahead of me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would have been aware of that. I don't know if I would have confessed. I would like to think I would have. But God in His grace only revealed so much to me, and I was able to take the next step. And I think in that, everyone's journey is different.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, especially in this issue or any issues of addiction, we love the stories of, we call the home run story, where we hear like, oh, I was an alcoholic for 20 years, and then, Jesus came into my life and I didn't have another drop.
Yeah, instant. Yeah.
And that's awesome. And that's wonderful. But I think that can set up an unrealistic expectation for a lot of people who struggle with these issues, and they struggle with the underlying pain and trauma that may be why they're reaching out to these different coping mechanisms. And so I thought it was going to be instantaneous, and she told me, no, you got a road ahead of you, but that's okay. But just understand that. And I didn't fully grasp that. And when I was out there in Seattle, I knew I needed to tell someone back here. And I thought I was going to get fired I thought I was going to be fired, and I wondered if my wife was going to divorce me. And, because I always had this, in the church, like porn was like horrible. Mm-hmm. And you would think like all sin's horrible, but we always view things on different levels.
Yeah.
And at that time, porn was up there. So I thought I was going to be fired, and I thought Jana was going to divorce me. And so when I was out in Seattle, I called Steve Walters. And if you don't know, Steve was a pastor here at Christ Community at the time. And I thought, Steve will love me, and he'll be my advocate. He'll be there with me. So called Steve, left a voicemail just because I was afraid if I came back to Omaha without saying something, like I would be easy to justify it on my way back here. Like, oh, well, whatever. I
did it, and I'm never going to do it again. And no one needs to know because I've already repented for it. Right.
Exactly. So. And how many times before, this time in Seattle where I had prayed to God, like I had repented, and we've all I can't speak for others where I'd make those vows like, God, I promise this time it'll be different. Yeah. I vow, and I think when we pray those prayers, we really do mean it, but we just have a lack of understanding of what, how we are entangled in sin and how our brains are wired and just the science behind it. And I think there's a real willingness, but I knew I needed to tell someone. So I called and left a voicemail for Steve. And so I came back, plane landed, Jana picked me up, and on the drive home, I'm telling her about this, and she was supportive. She was understanding. She, I think one thing that was to my benefit in that, was that I confessed and came to her. Now it's not always easy, and it's not always going to be like it can be messy. But Jana, she was really supportive, and she knew like something was up. She didn't know what. And, but she was right there, and just, we knew it was going to be a journey. We walked together, and she supported me all the way. And the more I continued on in this renewal journey, she's always there. So, but then when I came to work, I thought, okay, I left this voicemail, Steve, I'm going to get fired or something. And no, Steve was he was happy, supportive, and just proud of me. I shared my story with him, and Steve was always, he's a friend, and he was just, I don't know how else to put it, except he was just really supportive throughout it. And I was like, okay, I told someone on staff, and it looks like I'm not going to be fired. Yeah. Jana's still like, she loves me and she's proud of me. Okay, we're good. And then Steve's like, I think you should talk to Wendell. I'm like, why do I have to tell someone else this, And, but what I realize now, but not back then, it was in telling people, it helped to kind of expose that darkness to the light, confessing the sin, which was helpful. It was a way for God to redeem the story. And so, all right, I said, okay, Steve, I'll go talk to Wendell. And so Wendell and I went to Whole Foods for lunch, and I'm sharing my story with Wendell about how I'd struggled with pornography since, high school. And like, he's eating his salad, smiling, like, this is great, praise God. And I'm like, I'm telling you how I've like sinned and like I'm an addict. And he's like, oh, this is awesome. And I'm like, I remember thinking like, you're insane. Yeah. Like this, I feel like horrible. And he's happy. But it's like truly like the angels like celebrate when we repent. Like, I mean, Wendell is like an angel in a lot of ways. Like he understood what was happening. And I didn't, cause I'm like coming out of the mire of sin and coming out of the darkness. And he was right there like, this is awesome, Robert. I am so proud of you. I can't wait to see what God does in and through you. And I was like, okay, sure, whatever. But I look back like, yeah, he knew, like, it was like kind of God working in and through him to really encourage me and say, this is awesome what you're doing. I'm proud of you, love you, keep it up. So then he had me go talk to someone else, and I was kind of shaking my head, but I was used to it. And but that journey of me talking to someone else, it was people that they knew that I could trust, that they could trust with this story, and that each person was just kind of giving me some more encouragement, continuing to love me, continuing to help me in these early stages, which were so crucial in coming out of this darkness, coming out of this sin, and just finding freedom and finding hope in the midst of it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think being just a guy and in ministry for not even that long, this isn't the first story like I've heard of this kind of stuff, and I've got really good friends. We have a mutual friend that's dealt with, some of the pain and trauma and all the dominoes that fall after something like this happens. Like you were saying, man, the worst could happen. Literally, I could lose my job. I could lose my wife, all of these kind of things. And so I guess what were some of those thoughts as you were progressing towards that? And then how you talked a little bit about how you saw God's grace in the middle of it? Cause I have a buddy who, he had an affair, a couple affairs. And for him, he said the hardest part, and it kind of even drove the cycle even more, was thinking about, if I tell my wife, what kind of damage is this going to do to her? Right. And so he wanted to keep trying to fix it on his own and never tell his wife. And he's like, I could fix this. I could have a good track record. Maybe 5 years down the road, I could tell her what I did and things are going to be okay, 5 years down the road, because I've got a track record of how I've been clean and all that kind of stuff. But he said the thing, it was like a double-edged sword, because he didn't want to tell his wife, because he knew this had damaged him, but what it's going to do to her. Yeah. And then in turn, what it's going to do to her, how that's going to affect their relationship, and then all the dominoes and things just spin out of control. So how would you say, like, what kind of thoughts were going through your mind as far as like telling your wife, and then how did it affect her? Because no doubt it had to have affected, her and how she saw you, and maybe even how she saw herself. And self-value, because I think that's what he was telling me as they've gone through some counseling, was for her, his wife, that's where a lot of the pain was, because she thought it was because she wasn't good enough, or because she had gained a few pounds, or she didn't look like she did when they got married, or she just didn't have time for him because they had kids, and the sparks weren't there like they once were. And so she wanted to take all of it on herself, So what did that look like for, I guess, you and your story?
Yeah. For my story and for Jana, I mean, obviously nothing's universal in these kind of issues, but it was never, I shouldn't say never, but it was predominantly never about like another like woman or a comparison.
Yeah.
Like Jana's always been, there's a phrase I really love. She's been my standard of beauty. For me, it was kind of masking and dealing with pain and trauma from my childhood. And my parents divorced when I was 8, and there's other things of dysfunction in my family, but that never really got resolved. And I was never, as an 8-year-old kid, you don't know how to deal with that. And I think some family members who are well-meaning added damage to that with what happened with my parents. So I didn't know really who to go to or how to process that. And so and that just continues to fester throughout your life. So when I talked to Jana and I started on this renewal process, I think what was helpful is that there was an underlying issue, and that helped just kind of explain real quickly, like it wasn't about her. Like I can say that, but then as we were going through these, like we're going through some workbooks, we're reading, got these resources, we're reading stuff. She came to see, okay, it's not about me. And that's hard, and that's a real thing. And it made it easier though in dealing with that. I know a book that was helpful was Shanti Feldhan's, I'm probably mispronouncing her name, but For Women Only, which just kind of explained more of the science, the brain science behind how men and women are different and how they're wired differently and how they do things differently and look at things differently. And it's one of those things that's not to provide an excuse, but it provides context and for how we operate differently. But yeah, and then as I was starting the renewal, I was going through some of these different workbooks and resources, and just understanding how our family background and just the different things that the dynamics that play into, who we are, like even when we're in the womb, how different things can affect our, how our brains are wired. And like, we have no control over that. And I think that just helped us to understand better what was going on, why it happened. And Jana was willing to dive in and be there, right there with me, and learn more. And she wanted to help me as much as she could. She, any way she could help. It was just amazing to think, thinking back on it right now, just she was right there with me every step of the way. And I think what I tell guys is what helped me was confessing, and just, and I didn't have, I know like it's sometimes in the church we throw around, it's all level at the foot of the cross. True. Like sin is sin. Yeah. I did not have like a physical affair. Yes, I know like looking at porn I'm lusting after someone who's, after a woman who's not my wife. Yeah. I totally get that. Practically speaking though, not having the affair was an advantage to me. Like when I confessed to Jana, like if I would have actually had like a physical affair, there would be a lot more to work through and deal with, and find, we'd have to go through some deeper counseling in all likelihood. So that's something that's a little bit different from my story and others. I'm not trying to downplay. I'm not like what I did in any shape, way, or form. I do think that's something that differentiates my story from some others, and just some struggles that they've had with when they're working through that with their spouse. And for some, like they have really bad like porn addictions, and their spouse leaves them because they have an unwillingness to deal with that. So I just want to say from my story, it's just Jana was understanding, supportive, and I think me confessing and just where I was at in that path. Because it could have gone much worse, but where I was at, I think she was like, okay, we're going to deal with this, and I'm going to help you. I'm going to love you. And she was helping me kind of get back, with Jesus in this area, and making sure I towed the line a little bit.
Yeah. So how did you, just Paul's comments in Romans are reminding me of that, where grace abounded. How did you continue to see that as a gift and not something to take advantage of, because I think the other side, if a woman's been victimized, a man's been victimized, and then grace is offered freely, which it sounds like Jana was a great model of that, through that process. What kept you from abusing that?
Yeah, I think, I understood the damage it was doing to my life and to our marriage. I look back on the early years of our marriage when we were missionaries, and just how much time I had wasted, just, sitting in front of a computer, and how much how hurt I had been. So just in the early on, just realizing how I was beginning to find healing and how much more time I had, and realizing I had cheated Jana out of some early years of our marriage, which are supposed to be these halcyon days of marriage, so to speak. And I'm like, I owe her time, and I don't want to cheat her out of that anymore. I owe her the best of me, and I want to keep getting healed holistically, so she can have so I can give her the best of me. I love her. I want her to I want to be the best I can be for her. I didn't want to take advantage of her in that way. And not that I was in the past in my mind, I was saying I wasn't, but now I realize I was living selfishly, and no more. I wanted to do my best. Now I will add this, since 2007, I wish I could say I've been perfect and not looking at porn since then. No, I've had mistakes. I've fallen down. But then when I talk to, Jana, or someone in my renewal group, or a, counselor I'm seeing, they're like, all right, what do we do now? And they would encourage me, so I wouldn't kind of get in that spiral of well, no hope, I mean, I know I'm forgiven, but, I guess I'm just going to can't really beat this. So I'm just going to give in to porn or whatever it may be. They would always all right, you messed up, get back up. Let's have another good run, and, she was, it was good. And I wanted to be better. And I know it's not, people say, well, it's not about works, and true, but we work out our faith. And I wanted to be the best I could be for her. And we were having, when I confessed my sin with pornography, we just had Liam, and then we had Duncan in 2008, Gideon 2011, and Charlie in 2013. I'm like, I want to be the best dad I can be. I want to be fully present with them. I want to tell them, I don't want them to experience what I experienced and lose out on time, or lose out on whatever it may be. So I wanted to tell them that it is possible to defeat this. I know in our culture, and for my boys, and I'm really concerned, and it's just prevalent. I've had those talks with them at young ages, but I want to show them that it can be done, that you can live in this culture fully alive, and not be addicted to that.
Yeah, that's good. And I know you've written blogs about this. You've talked about this in other ways, and I'm sure you would love, anybody that would want to reach out to you. You'd totally talk absolutely. To them about it. I was going to ask this as a hypothetical question, but I think that'd be foolish to ask it as a hypothetical question, because I think it's a real question. Someone right now that's listening to this conversation is struggling with this. Multiple people are, that are struggling with this.
Absolutely.
I'm listening to this right now. They're listening to this right now. What's the next step? They, for some reason, they wanted to shut it off, but there's something inside of them that's saying, keep listening to this guy's story. And they're feeling some empathy and feeling maybe conviction. What do they do next? They're not going to a conference where there's counselors probably around where they can have that first step. What do I do? What do they do?
I would hope there's someone that they could talk to and confess that to. Christ Community Church has been fantastic. Like with this part of my life, they've been wonderful. Mark Ashton has been a champion and really supportive of staff, not just with this issue, but with any kind of sin issue. He wants people to find freedom. He wants people to be fully alive. When he asked me to share my story with his staff, I mean, his concern was for he knows there's other staff that deal with issues, and he wants them to know this is a safe place. And his hope was that in me sharing my story with his staff, that other people would understand it is safe to share. And I think that's a big thing for people. They struggle with whether it's pornography, whether it's some other sin issue. Who's that person they can talk to? So I would say find someone you can talk to. And for those here in the Omaha area, I'm not saying you need to switch churches, but I know Christ Community, they have City Care, there's Men of Integrity, there's other women's groups. Get connected with someone here that you can talk to. If not here, hopefully at your church or some other group or community that you're involved with. I think the first step is just confessing that, getting that out into the light. Just exposing that sin is so huge. And that was something that was really key for me early on. But I know here at Christ Community, I know that's something Mark really champions. He wants that. He wants it to be a safe place. And sometimes there's churches out there that will when there's a scandal, they'll try and dunk on other churches, so to speak, because that doesn't happen here. No, I'm pretty sure it does. It's just that people live in fear and are lying about it. So I just think if you can find someone to talk to just to start that process, your journey is probably going to be different from my own, but I think the first step though is confessing that, and to someone that you can trust, and hopefully it's someone that can just walk with you. That was a great thing I had here to a Christ Community. Steve Walters was someone that walked with me. There are parts of my renewal that were difficult. It was difficult for people I worked with and lived with because I had to change aspects of my life. I changed. I used to work in a lot more hours than I did after my renewal, and that caused some friction with some people I work with and some leaders. But Steve Walters was right there with me, encouraging me, telling me, "No, you're doing the right thing." And Mark Ashton, I know that was his heart too. He didn't, he wants people to find wholeness and freedom from sin. So I would say, yeah. Just find someone you hope that you can talk to. I mean, I'm here. People know me here in my area. Reach out to me, and they know you. And they can talk to you, Alex. Yeah. But just find someone that you can talk to. I think that's the big first step.
Yeah. If you don't have a person that you can think of in your mind, I know definitely Robert or myself would be willing to walk you through, get you all the right channels. Maybe we're not the end all be all to the answer, but we're a first step. And so reach out to us in whatever way, and we'd love to.
Yeah, and when I was doing the online campus, I had people email me a lot, and what I would try and do is if they were out of state, I would, I'm just doing a Google search, but we have a network of pastoral friends, church friends, and I would just try and find them a good church or a good community in their area. Say, hey, you should go check out this place, and I think it's going to be a good place. If I knew someone in the area, I would tell them the name of a pastor, and then I would reach out to that pastor and say, hey, be on the lookout for so-and-so. They're, and I would try and get them connected, because that's so huge. I mean, this sin tries to separate us, and especially this kind of sin of pornography or any kind of sexual sin, or if those who have been abused or hurt in any way, it isolates us. And the devil, we can do the devil's work for him, where we just kind of heap that shame continually on us. And if we can get in community, it's so helpful, and God will use it to help us in our renewal and in our healing.
Yeah. So good. Well, Robert, thanks again. Grateful for your friendship. Thanks for your vulnerability to be here and be behind the mic and have this conversation. I'm confident God's going to use it in people's lives, and I hope people take us up on that offer. So thanks again for being here, friend, and we'll see you at Chick-fil-A.
Right on, bro.
We're back. The magic of technology. We've transported you from one interview to another. What thoughts come to mind after hearing Robert's story? Rachel, why I'll put you in the hot seat. Why don't you start?
I guess one big thing that really stuck out to me was just the different people that were involved in his story, and like the clear like just power of people in his story. Like it wasn't just something that he was dealing with on his own, but there was like obviously a lot of people that came around him and were interacting with him in ways that he didn't even expect, just to help him through this. And so I just think the power of people in these kind of situations, I think, is really awesome. And so we need to be aware that it's important to bring people in on these situations and not shut others out. Mm-hmm. Especially, he was talking about how Satan wants you to be in the darkness. He doesn't want you to bring things out in the light. And I think once he brought it out into the light, there were so many people ready to help him and come alongside him with that. So I thought that was really cool.
And speaking of Satan, I don't think he wants this podcast to get out because we can like hear the rain pouring down on us. So if you're wondering what that sound is in the background, maybe you don't hear it, but I think you will.
I thought it was hail. My car is being damaged right now.
So if Alex escapes out of the studio right now, you know why.
Something that stuck out to me was the vulnerability that it took, not only for him to come on here and share that story on a public platform, like that takes so much vulnerability, but just the vulnerability throughout his story. So, and originally the vulnerability to even just talk to his wife about that, like, and he talked a lot about the fear that that he had of coming clean, and the fear that he would lose his job, that his wife would divorce him. And I think that fear is very real. And I think all of us have experienced that fear of like confessing and coming clean about something in our life. And so just the vulnerability to press through that fear into that courage was really just inspiring, I think, to hear and to listen to. And so just the vulnerability on all levels of his story was really impactful to me.
Yeah. And you mentioned how his wife kind of responded to the thing. And I think that's something we could easily like pass by and like listen, oh, how cool, his wife was supportive, but like just like how much grace and love and like that took for her to respond in that way.
It's like definitely not the norm story. Like I mean, you hear those stories, but I mean, I've also heard the story of wife comes down to the basement, catches husband, and then they're getting a divorce not long after that.
Right,
you know? And
because what he was doing was impacting her, and it probably hurt a lot. And for her to come back with that response is really powerful. And I think for anyone, any like spouse to respond in that way is going to have a huge impact on your marriage if you have that kind of a response to something like that.
And I also loved how he said at the end, your journey will probably not look like mine. Yeah. And I think that that's really important. So like, I mean, he could have told his wife and she could have had an opposite response. And so we don't want to paint the picture that like, oh, if you just come clean, everything will be great. I mean, I think there's a lot of freedom and a lot of good that comes from you just getting that off of your chest, you know, and just being authentic and real about that. But at the same time, I'm acknowledging that your journey may look different, but it's still worth having. And he really emphasized finding somebody to talk to. For me, what's been really impactful in my life is counseling. And that's something I love, that I can go in and talk to a counselor and I can just say all of the thoughts that I'm having and I leave and it's like I got all of that out and then that's that. Like nobody in my life, like it is a safe place for me to be. And so I would just encourage anybody that doesn't feel like they have somebody they can talk to, like seek that out, because even just having a place that you can go and you can just share with, knowing that somebody will listen to you and that they're not, that they can be trusted is just so important.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think next week, Eric alluded earlier that this will be like a 2-part kind of thing. And one of the spoiler alerts for next week is we're going to have a couple counselors that are professional counselors on talking about sex addiction. They both are specialists in this field, and so they've gotten all like the letters after their name. They can tell you about that later, that deal with this kind of stuff. But I think one of the things that Robert did allude to that was powerful in his story is that whatever addiction, whatever issue you have, if you're just trying to treat that symptom, and the counselors will break this down a little bit more, if you're just trying to, behavior modification is the answer, just to fix that thing, and you're not actually fixing what's underneath it and going back in time and thinking about all the things that led up to that and the holes and the voids that you're trying to fill inside of that, then it's not going to work. And so I think there's probably a lot of people that are listening even now that have tried it, that have made those deals with God, that have made those deals with their spouse, that have downloaded the app on their phone to try to protect them, that have done all of those things. And you're just trying behavior modification and you're wondering why it doesn't work. And it feels like you're beating your head over the wall and it's just not working, because there is real benefit in counseling and going to people that are professionals to do heart surgery and look back in your past, not just medically, but to look back in your past traumas and all those things that psychologically affect you. And so we don't have a problem doing that physically when we have symptoms and we want to heal a physical ailment. And we talked about this last week. Kyler talked about this with PTSD. There's a lot of stigma there of just trying to correct something like that. And then we don't find the answer. And then all of a sudden we keep going back and we keep having the cough and we're like, why is it not leaving? Yeah. And so I think that's so valuable, Mackenzie, in helping us continue to get rid of that stigma of counseling and what we can do there and how it provides real hope, I think.
I also think it's hard because, I mean, personally growing up in the church and specifically like anything around sexuality or that topic is so shame-based. Like you immediately felt like you were going to be ostracized for bringing it up. Everybody was struggling with it in their own form, but nobody wants to talk about it. And that's still relevant to today. Like I think people, no matter whether you're male, female, whatever problem it might be, you struggle with it on different levels. And I think it like for the church to just pretend that it doesn't exist, or even for us as Christians to act like, oh, this isn't news to me. There's pornography on the internet. Like what? Yeah. How does that happen? And like, I think sometimes we take that attitude because it's like, oh, well, we're so pure. We don't know anything about this and we don't want to talk about it. But I think it's something where by having these conversations and hearing someone's story like that too, can just, at least kind of bring you some sort of solace or comfort or whatever you need to maybe take those next steps. Yeah. And I think that's something that, like we said earlier, it's not always going to be the same story. It's not going to be the same outcome, but hopefully it's something that maybe something like this, hearing a story can help you achieve.
Yeah. And it's not going away. I mean, when we were all young, even like the iPhone wasn't around as prevalently as it is now. So if I wanted to go find pornography, like if that's something I wanted to do, I would have to work for it, right? Like I would have to maybe pay someone older to go get a magazine that's in the back of the magazine racks, or like talk to a buddy and be like, dude, does your dad have any magazines under, his bed or whatever? And so I think you had to work for it to get it back in the day, even when I was a kid. And now you have to work to protect yourself from it. Like, it's like you had to hunt for it back then, and now it's hunting for you. Yeah. And I think knowing that about the advent of technology, and it's at your fingertips, and literally you can be doing it on your device at any time. Any of us could literally pull it up right now and get through all of the firewalls and all the stuff that even our church has to protect us from this, because it's just so easy to get to that. And so I think that it's not going away. If anything, it's going to continue to ramp up and become more normal, I think, in society. And if we don't talk about it, then it's just gonna be so detrimental.
Yeah. And I've heard so many stories of people saying like, yeah, when I was 8 years old and I was playing a computer game on my computer, like I wasn't even looking for anything and it popped up. And like at this point, you're a child, your brain is still forming. Like you have no like awareness of what's kind of coming at you, and so it just starts from there and just goes from there. When kids aren't even really trying to look for it or do anything with it, it's coming at them, and they don't necessarily have the power and the wisdom to deal with it then. So I think it's valuable for us to know and help kids start dealing with this as well.
I think I brought up the fact that I had used BitTorrent in the past, and for things, and not that I was searching out pornography on there, but I do remember one time I was trying to download the movie Ice Age, And this is just an example of how readily available or easily it is to mistakenly have access to pornography. I downloaded this, which I will admit now was an illegal thing to do. I should not have done that. But I set my wife down. We were going to watch Ice Age, this family-friendly movie.
I don't know. I have a feeling where this is going. It's not going to be good.
I hit play on Ice Age, and let me tell you, that was not a cartoon. Okay. There was a hot tub. So it's one of those things where like it will come at you any way it can. And I think it's one of those, we can laugh at that example, right? Yeah. And go, that's funny. But the truth of the matter is, it's the reality. Yeah. And I think about my 8-year-old son right now, and like his grasp of the internet is much more around apps. So like he's got his YouTube app, or he's got this app or whatever. So he doesn't even really know what a web browser is. And like, honestly, I'm just like, as long as I can keep you in the dark on that, the better I feel, because it's just I don't want to live in fear around that stuff, but I also just know how gripping it can be to someone. And so I think just having those conversations, being open about it. I mean, even as a father to a daughter, like I hope that like you'll hear stories of men who, when their daughters start to get to an older age, where there's this really, sometimes there's this paramount moment where it's like you're objectifying these women, and like look at who you're hurting. Like, look in your daughter's eyes and tell me, that you can just objectify these women in pornography or whatever, but like you don't want that for your life, for your daughter, right? You don't want. So there's so many things that are just, there's moral complications to it all across the board, spiritual and moral. And I just think it's one of those things where people have to take notice of it. They have to talk about it. We have to be more open about it, and we can't stigmatize it. We need to just go, like, you need to be able to, say, hey, this is a real thing, and it's out there.
I think that's another key thing, is like stigmatizing it. Like when he was sharing about how there was an underlying thing that he was trying to just like numb out the pain. He was using it as something to just kind of put a Band-Aid over the pain and deal with the pain. And I think that really helped me kind of understand a little different level of it, of like, you know what? We all do things to numb out the pain. We binge watch Netflix. We shop and spend too much money. There's all these different things that we're all doing to try and numb the pain. And just some of them seem to be more, oh, wow, I can't believe they're doing that, you know, kind of thing. But it's like we're all doing the same thing. It's just in different forms. And I think that really helps to kind of almost level the playing field, be like, okay, why are we making this such a big deal? Like we're all in the same boat. We're all struggling. We're all sinners. We need to be coming around each other and helping encourage each other and all of these things. So,
right.
And it's one of those, and there's so many of these that happen in life where you can say, it's not hurting anyone. I think there's this false notion that me looking at someone on a screen isn't actually hurting anybody. And we don't even want to address trafficking that's happening, like that. So much trafficking is actually like the cause of a lot of pornography and things like that people can get their hands on, or they don't want to think about women who are just doing this, or men who are doing this as absolutely, there's an income behind it. They're not just doing it to give you pleasure. Yeah. They're doing it because it is a $1 billion industry. And so they have something that they can offer, and so they're okay with giving that away, and maybe sometimes not okay with giving away, sometimes drugged up. A lot of painful things happen, on the other side that people don't even know. And so we are hurting a lot of people, and we'll talk next week a little bit more about how it's hurting us internally as well, not just hurting other people. But we don't like to talk about that part, like slavery that still exists inside of our world, and we want to be ignorant to that, because then we don't have to be accountable to it. So,
all right. Well, I think that does it for this week. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to all of you for being here and sharing your inputs and your insight. That's been really good, and I hope this can help anyone who might be listening and is on this journey. Hopefully this can kind of help you make that next move. Until next time, if you want to reach out to us, you can do that on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can email the podcast directly at podcast@cccomaha.com. cccomaha.org. And if you're looking for someone to help you through something, you can email us there and we can put you in touch with somebody. I think, Alex, you'd even offer your email up for an email if someone wants to contact you directly. That's alexe@cccomaha.org.
That's it. Nobody else we don't have people that are reading our emails or any weird stuff like that happening.
We'd love to put you in contact with the right people here at the church. But until next week, we'll see you then.